Well, happy Friday, everybody. We've come to the end of a week. Hope it's been a really good one for you. Also, hope you are excited about being in God's house Sunday and worshiping Jesus, that you are excited about inviting people to come to church with you, and that you are actually doing that. Praying for people and inviting people. Look forward to seeing you this coming Sunday here at First Baptist. Today in our Bible reading plan for our devotion, we are in Psalm 80. And Psalm 80, just like Psalm 79 and Psalm 74, is a lament over the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by the Babylonians as part of God's judgment on the Jewish nation for their decades of sinning and so on. And there's this powerful image starting at verse 8. We won't read it. You can do that yourself. Hopefully you already read it. But there's this powerful image of the nation of Israel being a vine, which God plucked up in Egypt, referring to the Exodus, and planted in the promised land. And over time, that vine grew and covered the whole nation, covered the mountains, and became a vineyard. It's a beautiful picture of the nation of Israel being freed from slavery in Egypt, planted in the promised land, and then growing and prospering as a nation. And then he talks about the hedges. They would build a hedge around a vineyard to keep wild animals out, to protect the fruit. And in this image, he describes the hedges being torn down, God tearing them down. In other words, God allowed the Babylonians to tear down the hedge, protecting the vineyard. And now all these different animals, wild animals and people, everybody that wants to just walks in and eats the fruit from the vineyard, from the vines. And it's just this image that God had brought destruction on Jerusalem, and now she was being plundered by other nations. And just like Psalm 79 and Psalm 80, the author is praying, is singing, is crying out to God to restore the nation, to heal them and to restore them. But what spoke to my heart, what really stood out to me in this chapter, is the very clear picture, the image that is painted of the suffering, of the pain that the Jewish nation was experiencing because of God's judgment on them for their decades of sin and rebellion and stubbornness and so on. Look with me at verses 5 and 6. Talking about the people of God, the nation of Israel, he says, God, you have fed them with the bread of tears. God, rather than feeding us with manna from heaven, rather than feeding us with actual bread, you have fed us with the bread of tears. That's a powerful image. And you have made them to drink tears in large number. We don't have wine. We don't have good water. God, we're having to drink buckets of tears. That's a tragic image of how sad, how horrible things were, how much they were in pain, how much grief. Verse 6. You make us an object of contention to our neighbors, of strife to our neighbors, and our enemies laugh among themselves. The idea is that our enemies, the other nations, the pagan nations surrounding Israel after they were conquered by the Babylonians, were mocking them. Look at them. You thought you were special. You thought you were somebody high and mighty. Look at you now, laughing at them. Those of you who are a little older like me remember, and when I first moved to Rock Hill to pastor First Baptist more than 35 years ago, all the scandal, the fallout from Jim Baker and PTL was still fresh. And it's one of the reasons that we put very stringent checks and balances in place when it comes to money, so we would not have a scandal like that. Those my age remember very vividly the scandal of Jimmy Swaggart, the evangelist, and his phony, just horrendous weeping when he repented after getting caught with a prostitute. And lost people just mocked and made fun because it brings shame and disgrace on the cause of Christ. These enemies, they're laughing at us. Today we have quote-unquote celebrity pastors. Ravi Zacharias, one example, many others. And it hinders the work of God. When God's people sin, listen, when God's people sin and such, and it doesn't have to be pastors, it happens on a local level, it happens in families, it happens in neighborhoods. When someone, whether they are on a small scale, a large scale, or anywhere in between, is known because they claim to be a follower of Christ, and then they sin in these terrible ways and they fall. See, here's the thing. Sin will always find you out, the Bible says. And see, sometimes God is the one working behind the scenes to uncover the sins of those who claim to be His. Sin will find you out. Sometimes God disciplines by allowing things to happen that lead to the fall and the disgrace and the humiliation of the hypocrite, of the sinner. But when that happens, the sinner's not the only one who cries. Part of those who love them, who trusted them. Tears on the part of God's people who don't even know them because it makes witnessing harder. Tears on the part of youth pastors who try to pour into teenagers, and the teenagers just kind of laugh because they know their parents are just playing games. They're really kind of phony. They're religious, but their hearts don't belong to Jesus. Tears and pain and suffering. So many people get hurt, and so many people cry, and the cause of Christ suffers. And let me say that obedience to Jesus and holiness always matter, not just on the part of the famous and well-known, but on the part of every mom and dad and every grandmother and grandfather, part of every local church pastor and student pastor, on the part of every deacon, on the part of everybody at the job site and in the schoolhouse who's known for following Jesus. Obedience to Jesus and holiness on the part of all of us always matters. Because when we don't take that seriously, it ends up with a lot of people shedding tears. And we don't want that, do we? That's the word for today. I'll see you Monday as we begin reading the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 1, and then Sunday here at First Baptist as we continue worshiping King Jesus. God bless you. I'll see you.